Welcome to Sinister Stories from the Shadows. Once you hear these stories, the darkness will never feel the same again. Story 1, The Collector's Basement. Rain hammered the city like static. Mara sat slumped over an empty glass at the far end of the bar, her termination letter crumpled in her coat pocket. She had laughed too loudly at first, telling the bartender she was finally free, but as the night bled on, the laughter went thin. By closing time, she could barely stand. Outside, the pavement swayed under the neon lights. She tried to walk home, but the street tilted, the lamps smearing into bright ribbons. Her last clear thought was that she needed to sit down for a moment, just to rest her eyes. A shadow moved beside her. A man's voice said, "Hey, you're not safe out here. Let me help you." The world folded in on itself. When Mara opened her eyes, her mouth was dry, and a dull ache pulsed behind her temples. The air was still, heavy with the smell of metal and dust. She was lying on a narrow cot in a windowless room. Concrete walls, a locked door, a single humming bulb overhead. At first, she thought she was in a hospital basement, until she saw the chain looped around her ankle. Concrete walls, a single bulb, a locked door with a slit for food, and silence, except for the hum. At first, she thought it was a nightmare, some fevered dream after a car crash, maybe. But when she screamed, a voice from the other side of the door said, "You'll hurt your throat if you do that again." He spoke gently, too gently. He called himself Elliot. He told her he had rescued her, that the world above was dangerous, that people didn't appreciate her, that she was safe now. The meals came regularly, always warm, always perfect. He never showed his face for more than a few seconds at a time. But he spoke to her through the door, every night, asking questions about her favorite songs, her childhood memories, her fears. Over the weeks, he began to call her his favorite. She learned quickly not to resist, not out of trust, but because resistance made him quiet, and his silence was worse than his presence. When he stopped talking, the hum in the basement grew louder, vibrating through the pipes, whispering like voices in the walls. One night, she dared to ask about the hum. "That's the others," he said, "but you don't need to worry about them. You're different." The next morning, she found a new chain fixed to the floor near her bed, thicker than the one before. He left her gifts, books, old records, a cracked mirror. She realized he wasn't keeping her alive out of kindness. He was curating her, like something rare, something to own. And every time she looked into that mirror, she saw herself fading, not bruised, not bloodied, but dimmed, as though the basement itself was draining her reflection. Then one day, she stopped seeing Elliot altogether. Only his voice through the vent. "You're perfect now," he whispered. "You're not like them. You're mine. Forever." She stopped counting days. The hum grew louder. Sometimes, in the moments before sleep, she swore she heard other voices within it, faint, pleading, trapped like her. But one of them, she realized, sounded just like hers. She didn't sleep that night. The hum filled the air again, pulsing through the pipes like a heartbeat buried in the walls. But now, beneath that low vibration, she was certain she heard words. Whispers, blurred and layered, as if several voices spoke at once. When the light bulb flickered, shadows slid across the concrete like figures trying to crawl out. Mara pressed her ear to the vent. "Who's there?" she whispered. No answer, just the hum again, rising and falling, a mechanical sigh that somehow sounded alive. The next time the door opened, it was silent. No warning, no voice from the vent. Just the scrape of metal and the faint rush of air. A plate of food sat on the floor. But next to it was something new. A small dog-eared book. No title on the cover. She flipped through it. The pages were filled with names. Hundreds of them, written in jagged handwriting. Some were crossed out. Others had notes beside them. She turned to the last page. The newest name wasn't written yet, but she recognized the indentation of letters pressed into the paper as if someone had started writing and then stopped. It spelled Mara. She began to notice other details. The air smelled faintly of oil and old paint. The pipes along the ceiling vibrated when the hum began, as if something was being powered elsewhere, or someone was moving below. On what might have been her 8th day, she decided to explore beyond the room. When the door opened again for food, she waited until the footsteps faded, then wedged the broken cot leg into the gap once more. This time the latch gave way. She slipped into a narrow hallway, lit by a single bulb. The air was colder here, and the humming was louder, coming from somewhere down the corridor. She followed it. The hallway ended in another door, slightly ajar. She pushed it open and stepped into a larger room filled with rows of objects. Old furniture, cracked mirrors, boxes stacked to the ceiling. The hum came from an old ventilation shaft in the corner. When she crouched to listen, she froze. Through the grate, she heard faint sobbing. A woman's voice, hoarse and tired. "Hello?" Mara whispered. Who's there?" The crying stopped. Then a whisper answered, "Go back. He'll hear you. He always hears us." Mara's breath caught. "There are others?" No response. Only the hum again, deeper now, vibrating in her ribs. Suddenly, a voice came from behind her. "Why are you out of your room, Mara?" She turned slowly. He stood in the doorway. The man from the vent. She saw him clearly for the first time. Middle-aged, ordinary face. Calm eyes. The kind of man who would pass unnoticed on any street. She tried to speak, but no words came. He stepped closer. "You've been exploring. That's not good. You might hurt yourself." He smiled faintly. "I thought you understood. You're my favorite. You don't need to see the others." He took a step forward, and the hum suddenly surged, filling the room with a low, metallic roar. Dust fell from the ceiling. The mirrors rattled. For the briefest moment, Mara saw reflections in the mirrors. Faces, blurred and gray. Dozens of them staring back at her. Then the lights went out. When Mara woke again, she was back on her cot. The chain had been replaced. Thicker this time, bolted deeper into the concrete. The book was gone. Only the hum remained. Steady and endless. And now, when she closed her eyes, she could swear she heard a new voice within it. A whisper that sounded just like her own, calling out from somewhere deep in the dark. Time lost all shape. Days and nights no longer meant anything. Only the hum remained, pulsing like a heartbeat through the concrete. Sometimes the light stayed on for hours. Sometimes it flickered and went dark for what felt like days. When it did, Mara whispered to herself, just to prove she still had a voice. She wasn't sure if the man, Elliot, as she'd once heard him call himself, was still upstairs. Sometimes she thought she heard his footsteps. Other times, she wondered if the hum had replaced him entirely. Then one day, something changed. The hum stuttered. It rose in pitch, whined, and then, for the first time, stopped completely. The silence was deafening. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but the air was different, lighter, almost breathable. She noticed dust drifting from the ceiling, and then faint light seeping through the cracks around the vent. Someone was up there, or something. Mara pressed her ear to the vent. Nothing. Then, slowly, she began unscrewing the grate with a piece of cot metal she'd hidden under her mattress. It took forever, hands shaking, heart hammering. When the final screw fell loose, she felt cold air on her face. She climbed. The vent was narrow, and her chain clanked softly with every movement. But after what felt like an eternity, she reached an opening and peered out. The space beyond wasn't another room. It was a tunnel, low, curved, and lined with pipes that stretched into darkness. The air smelled of oil and decay. She crawled forward, the metal biting into her knees. Then she saw it. Another vent cover. Behind it, a faint glow. She pressed her eye to it and froze. Below her lay a chamber filled with machinery, old and humming faintly. But it wasn't the machines that stopped her breath. Against the far wall stood rows of glass cases, each lit from within by a dull yellow light. Inside them were shapes, human still, preserved like museum exhibits. Her stomach turned. She could see faces, some old, some young, all motionless, all perfectly arranged as though displayed for someone's private admiration. The hum returned, faint but rising, and with it, a voice over a hidden speaker. "I told you not to wander, Mara." She turned, but the tunnel behind her was pitch black. "You're curious," the voice said, calm and cold. "That's what makes you different. That's why you're still here." The hum grew louder. The glass cases below began to shake, faintly at first, then violently. The lights flickered, illuminating the faces again. And for a split second, their eyes opened. All of them. Mara scrambled backward through the vent, heart pounding, metal scraping her palms. The hum now filled the air around her like thunder. When she reached the grate, leading back to her cell, she dropped through, landing hard on the floor. The light bulb flickered. The hum slowed. Then came the voice again, soft and patient. "It's all right. You've seen too much, but that's my fault. I forget how curious you are." She pressed against the wall, searching for something. Anything. The voice continued, closer now, almost beside her ear. "You understand now, don't you? The others weren't chosen. They broke. You didn't. You're still perfect." The door opened with a long metallic groan. Light poured in, but she didn't look toward it. She stared at the vent instead, at the faint reflection of her own face in the metal. It flickered. For a heartbeat, it wasn't her reflection at all. It was one of the still faces from the glass cases, staring back at her with hollow eyes. Then the light went out. When the hum returned, it was softer, slower, like breathing. Somewhere above, the machinery powered down, one generator at a time. In the darkness, the voice whispered its final words. "You're my favorite, Mara. You always will be." And this time, when the whisper faded, the hum that filled the basement didn't come from the walls anymore. It came from her. Story 2. The Devil's Deed. It began the night of the eclipse. Claire left the bar early, the way you leave a party that was never really for you. She'd gone because her friends begged. "It'll be good for you, forget the office, forget the cutbacks." But the laughter inside clanged off the glassware like dropped coins. Outside, the city smelled of rain and hot pavement. A shadow crossed the moon, and the streetlights tensed, dimming to a coppery hush. He was leaning against a lamppost as if he had always been there, tall, elegant, coat open to the night. His smile looked like a secret he was willing to share. "You look like someone who needs fresh air," he said. The voice was calm and low. They fell into conversation, the way you step into a warm room, naturally, without noticing the threshold. He asked her ordinary questions. "Where do you live? Do you like your work?" Yet each answer seemed to loosen a knot inside her. He didn't offer his drink. He didn't seem to have one. When she asked his name, he said, "Lucian." And the name felt familiar in the way that a song you've never heard before can still get stuck in your head. They walked until the moon went dark as a blown bulb. In the shadow, the city held its breath. A bus rumbled past, and the windows reflected the two of them back at themselves for a heartbeat. A woman with a night in her hair, and a man with a smile that didn't need light to be seen. By dawn, he was gone, as if he'd stepped backward into a door she couldn't see. On the nightstand lay a small silver pendant she didn't remember taking off his neck, a circle etched with fine lines that refused to settle into shapes. She closed her hand around it and felt a barely there warmth, like breath. A month later, she bought a test because her body had gone quiet in a way that was not quiet at all. In the pharmacy mirror, she looked pale and conspiratorial, as if her reflection were in on something she wasn't. 2 lines bloomed pink. She stared. She laughed once, a startled sound like a door unlocking by mistake. The night she tried to throw the pendant away, the kitchen lights flickered out. In the dark, she found herself sliding it back into the drawer. The pregnancy was too easy. Friends told her she was lucky. No nausea, no headaches. An appetite that was steady and strange. She craved cold fruit and the smell of thunder. At her first appointment, the fetal monitor skipped. The nurse tapped it, frowning. At the second appointment, the fluorescent light stuttered in synchrony with the baby's heart, then steadied. The doctor blamed wiring. Clara nodded and didn't say anything about how the air felt heavier around the exam table, as if the room were holding itself steady for her. She dreamed of red clouds, of a long corridor whose floor was made of smooth, cooled stone. In the dream, a boy walked ahead of her, never looking back. When she called his name, her voice bounced and came back stranger. When the labor came, it was fast. The lights in the delivery room went out for exactly 13 seconds. An odd number Claire only knew because the nurse, half laughing, half unnerved, counted out loud in the dark. The emergency power brought them back. The baby was born silent and staring, his eyes wide open, as if he had arrived not from a womb, but from a long conversation. She named him Gabriel. It felt right in her mouth. A soft word that made space around itself. He hardly cried. He slept through the night from the first week, as if he didn't need practice at being human the way other babies did. Visitors cooed about what an angel he was, and then faltered, caught by the way his eyes seemed to fix on them a moment longer than comfortable. "He's really observant," they said, finding a polite ledge to stand on. The family dog would not go near him. When Clara set Gabriel on a blanket in the living room, the dog orbited the far wall, eyes low, refusing even treats if they passed too close. "Old man's just jealous," her brother said over the phone, and Clara laughed because the alternative was to sit very still and listen to the silence. On their first walk, a gray finch fell out of the elm above the stroller without a sound and lay at Gabriel's feet, perfect and still. She scooped it into a grocery bag and told herself it was nothing. The city had birds in every condition. The city dropped things from the sky all the time. She walked under different trees after that. By 4, Gabriel could read well enough to surprise his preschool teacher, who avoided the word prodigy and used curious instead, as if curiosity were a diagnosis. He didn't share toys, but he didn't want anyone else's either. He collected small things, smooth stones, bread ties, bottle caps, and arranged them in precise lines along the baseboards. If Clara moved a single piece to vacuum, he noticed within an hour. He didn't laugh often, but when he did, it arrived, as if he'd remembered it from somewhere else. Twice Clara found plants in the kitchen withered overnight. Once a basil pot, once a vase of tulips her sister had left on the counter. The tulips had bent and curled as if bowing to some invisible heat. The oven clock read 3:03, then 3:30, then 3:03 again. She unplugged it. The wall hummed softly where the outlet was, a sound no one else could hear. The neighbor's cat stopped showing up on the fence. Clara saw the missing posters near the bodega and told herself the city dropped things on the ground. Yes, but it also swallowed them. She didn't imagine the cat beneath the couch, staring at the new baby, tail lashing slowly, like a fuse. She didn't imagine Gabriel staring back. She didn't imagine anything at all. She wiped the counters and folded the laundry and walked to the park, where the wind smelled like rain, even when the sky was clean. One evening, the back garden flashed with a heat Clara felt from the living room couch. She ran outside and found a blackened circle in the grass, the size of a dinner plate, as if a magnifying glass had knuckled the sunlight into one hateful point. No matches, no wires, no candles. Gabriel at the sliding door watched the smoke lift and smiled once, tiny and absolute. She ordered a child-proof lock for the kitchen knives and didn't tell anyone about it. At night, she locked her bedroom door and lay there listening for a sound she wouldn't be able to name until she heard it. The silver pendant migrated of its own will. She tucked it into the back of a drawer. Weeks later, it turned up in the sock basket, then behind the sofa, then on the top shelf of Gabriel's closet. She asked him about it once, casually, the way you ask a child where he put a thing. He looked at her with interest, as if she'd asked a riddle, and said, "It likes corners." He whispered to the dark in a language that ran along the ceiling like water. She told herself he was playing, that children made up languages all the time, but the words had a certainty that invented things never quite have. Sometimes the whispers made the hair along her arms lift, a cool breeze inside the skin. At parent night, the teacher, Susan, young, enthusiastic, earnest, touched Clara's wrist and said, "He's very composed. It's unusual. Also, sometimes when I turn around, he's already standing where I was going to ask him to go." She laughed, embarrassed by her own sentence. "I mean, of course he's quick. Just, he has a way of knowing what we'll ask for. The other kids are in awe." Clara nodded. She smiled until it felt like stretching a bruise. On the bus home, their reflections followed along the window. For a heartbeat, she thought Gabriel's reflection looked straight at her, while his real eyes watched the street. When she blinked, both of them were looking out again, and she told herself that glass always plays small tricks. That night, he left a spiral of small white bones on the porch, clean and dry, as if the rain had rinsed them, arranged with the calm precision of his bottle cap rose. She gathered them into an old shoebox and pressed the lid down like sealing a letter. She didn't open the box again. When she took the trash out 3 days later, the box wasn't in the bin. She didn't ask. On his 7th birthday, the doorbell rang at dusk. Clara knew it was him before she opened the door. You know certain things, and then you pretend not to know them for as long as you can. Lucian looked exactly as he had under the lamplight in the eclipse. No older, no new lines. The same coat, the same patience. The porch light licked copper off his hair. "Gabriel's grown fast," he said. "You've done well." The house seemed to gather itself around his voice. Somewhere a pipe hummed and stopped. "Who are you?" Clara asked, though she had a list of other questions, though she had been writing them in her head for years, the way a person rehearses an evacuation plan in a house they know is already on fire. He smiled. You know my name. What do you want? Only what I've always wanted, he said, to keep a promise. Gabriel came down the hall quietly, bare feet soundless on the floor. He held the pendant, the chain wound twice around his fist. He looked at Lucien and said, without hesitation or ceremony, Father. The word hung for a tiny eternity between them, a key in a lock that had been waiting. Clara felt her knees go specific, as if remembering their instructions too late. No, she said, and hated the thinness of it. No one is going anywhere. You don't get to walk in and take... When she looked at Gabriel, he was watching her with a softness that made something inside her split. Lucien raised a hand, not in warning, but in benediction. No one's taking anything. He belongs to what he is, Clara, he said gently, as if talking someone off a ledge. You gave him life. That was the one thing I could not do alone. The air grew warmer without moving. The shadows leaned. On the wall by the stairwell, their three shapes stretched long and wrong, and for a blink, Clara saw Gabriel's shadow open into wings that left no feathers behind. She grabbed her son's hand and turned for the door. Outside, the street was more absence than space. No cars, no voices. The houses across the way dimmed, as if they'd been painted and the paint never dried. The sidewalk ran on without perspective. She took 2 steps, and the second step laid itself on top of the first step, like a loop. She tried the back door. The garden lay flat, no crickets, no breeze, the fence taller than it had ever been, and farther away. Lucien didn't follow. He stood where he had been, as if he owned his patience the way other people own chairs. There's nowhere to go, he said with no malice at all. Not yet. Gabriel squeezed her hand once and then let go. The pendant chain uncoiled and fell soft as breath. Clara didn't sleep. She moved through the house like a tide, washing at thresholds, retreating and returning. The night was a long corridor with doors that wouldn't open. By morning, the city had put itself back together. The neighbor watered her geraniums. A bus yawned and sighed. The upstairs couple argued softly about the electric bill and kissed in the hallway, because that is how their arguments always ended. Gabriel sat at the kitchen table eating cereal in precise spoonfuls. He looked up when she entered and said, cheerful as a morning show, can we go to the park after school? She nodded. She made coffee. She watched the steam lift and tried to make a case to herself that Ordinary had come back like a brave friend. At school pickup, the teacher's smile said there had been a day. He was very helpful at cleanup, she said. We're doing a unit on habitats. He drew a forest with no sun, just eyes. Very creative. She handed Clara a paper that didn't look like a forest and didn't look like anything she had a word for. On the way home, they passed a utility crew opening a manhole. A heat breathed out of the ground, and the men cursed good-naturedly and laughed. Gabriel slowed and looked down into the dark with a private familiarity that made Clara's grip on his shoulder tighten. That night, she dreamed of the corridor again, lit by torches that burned without smoke. She walked beyond where she could go when she was awake. At the end of the corridor stood a door with the same symbol as the pendant scratched into it, and she knew the door could open if she spoke the right word. In the dream, she spoke, and the door opened on a room full of mirrors that didn't reflect anything. She woke at 3:03 precisely, the way the clock had mistakenly told the time, and heard whispers through the vent in the hall. She couldn't make out words, only a cadence like instructions given by a conductor no one could see. She got up. She opened Gabriel's door and stood in the frame. He was awake, sitting cross-legged on the bed, the pendant turning slowly in his hand. For a moment, the chain cast a moving shadow on the wall that traced a circle, and then a line, and then a circle again, as if writing itself. "Mama," he said, and the word almost undid her. "I'm not tired." "Sleep anyway," she said. "Please." He lay down obediently, eyes open a moment longer than children's eyes usually stay. When they closed, the chain stilled. The spiral on the porch returned. Not bones this time. White feathers, clean and quiet, laid in a pattern that made the breath in her throat go careful. She swept them into a trash bag and tied it twice. When she came back from the bin, the porch was clean, as if the broom had erased itself, as if the porch had been made so that nothing could remain on it for long. In the basement, near the old furnace, she found circles of ash on the cement floor. No matches, no candles, no teenage prank. The washing machine made a sound that might have been a laugh if machines laughed. She touched the furnace door and felt a residual warmth that was not heat but memory. On the highest shelf of the pantry, behind the holiday platters, she found the shoebox she had thrown away weeks ago. The lid lifted as if to let something out. Inside, the bones were gone. In their place lay a folded piece of paper with a child's handwriting, a looping script that wasn't Gabriel's. She unfolded it and found a single line, transcribed in something like ink and something like shadow. "It likes corners." She put the box back and did not tell anyone about the note. Whom would she tell? What sentences could she form that wouldn't embarrass the air? On a rainy Thursday, the doorbell rang again. She opened it fast, prepared this time to slam it, to say no, to say everything she had not said the first time. But no one stood on the porch. The street was wet and lawful. The neighbor's recycling bin politely upended by the wind. On the welcome mat lay the pendant, bright as if it had learned how to reflect better. She didn't touch it. She fetched the kitchen tongs and lifted the chain and dropped it into a drawer. When she turned around, Lucian sat at the table in the dark, one ankle crossed over the other, a posture like a question posed to a room. "How did you get in?" she asked calmly, like a person cataloging an insect they were not afraid of. "Doors are a courtesy," he said. "We use them when we want to be seen." "What are you?" she asked, and he smiled because she had asked the question he liked. "The oldest story," he said. "A name for the part of things that watches back." "You can say what you are," she said. "I can hear it." "And you can decide what to call it," he replied. "Either way, it doesn't change what Gabriel is becoming." He didn't touch anything. The real estate of his body in the chair was so undisturbing it disturbed her. "He belongs with me," he said. "He always did. But you," and here his voice softened in a way that made her angry, "you made him possible. That matters." "Take your gratitude and get out," she said, surprising herself. He laughed, not unkindly. "You're brave." "I'm his mother." He nodded. "That too?" She reached behind her blindly and found the drawer knob. The pendant lay there, calm as a sleeping animal. "If he goes with you," she said, "what happens to him?" "He becomes what he is." "And if he stays with me?" Lucian tilted his head. "He becomes what he is." The answer was not cruel. It was worse than that. It was logical. She realized then that choice was not the lever she'd hoped for. The fulcrum was elsewhere, under a world she could not lift. "Get out!" she said again. He stood, adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, and was gone, without the door participating. She sat down slowly and put both her hands flat on the table to stop them from looking like birds. That night, the city lost power for 17 minutes. In the sudden dark, the pendant glowed faintly. enough for her to see the etched lines shift like a school of fish. She turned it face down and felt the light anyway. When it ended, it did not feel like an ending. It felt like a season changing while she was in the grocery store. It was an ordinary morning. Toast, a jacket battle, the ritual forgetting of the lunchbox, and the ritual returning for it. At the curb, Gabriel hugged her in the way he seemed to have taught himself, brief and precise, as if kindness were a measurement. He looked over her shoulder and smiled at someone she couldn't see. For a moment, the sunlight coming down the block bent, as if going around a corner. "Be good," she said, which was what she always said, and he laughed because the instruction amused him. She watched him walk toward the school doors. He didn't look back. He reached for the handle, and wasn't there anymore. No sound, no distress, no theatrics. The space simply did not have him in it. A teacher rushed to hold the door for a child who had been there. A child ran past laughing. A bus unloaded a flock of backpacks. Clara stood perfectly still and felt the air where her son had been, as if the air might answer questions. She did not scream. She had been practicing not screaming for years. People were kind. The principal ushered her into an office that smelled of coffee and whiteboard cleaner. Someone brought her a glass of water, as if grief were a dehydration you could treat. Forms were explained, timelines were established. She nodded at the right places and signed where they asked and did not say that time had been rearranged in front of her, and therefore no timeline could hold. At home, the house had tidied itself of him. There were no picture frames. There were no crayons under the couch. The bottle caps along the baseboards had never been there. The shoebox in the pantry had never been bought. The teacher's emails were gone. The backpack hook hung undecorated. Neighbors waved with the same neighborly rhythm as always. The dog across the street barked at a squirrel that was too confident to be a squirrel. The upstairs couple argued about the electric bill and kissed in the hallway, because that is how their arguments always ended. The city carried its weight like a dancer. On the dresser in her bedroom, the pendant lay polished. She watched it from the doorway, as if it might run. She sat on the edge of the bed and picked it up. The lines etched into it looked, for a moment, like a map. She couldn't read it. She didn't know if maps are for reading. That night she slept without dreaming for the first time since the eclipse. Years found her, as years do. She learned the weather's new moods. She took long buses to unfamiliar neighborhoods and sat in parks where no one would expect her to have a reason. Sometimes she taught herself to laugh at television and then cried because she had done it correctly. She bought a plant and kept it alive as proof that life was a thing made of small loyalty. On certain days, the sky went a deeper red than it had any right to be. In crowds, she would sometimes see a tall young man, with her eyes and Lucian's smile, moving with a composure that practiced itself, and her heart would leap like a new thing, and then sit down again. She did not chase. She watched the air close behind him politely. The pendant never tarnished. She hid it in different places, between books, in winter pockets, in the cupboard with the flower, and sometimes she would find it not where she left it, but where it wanted to be. On the nightstand, on the windowsill in the kitchen catching morning light, on the porch in the exact center of the welcome mat, as if it approved of the word. Once a year, on the night the moon remembered its trick, she woke to the feeling of small footsteps in the hallway. She opened her door and listened. The silence had the texture of breathing. In the mirror for a heartbeat, a boy with careful eyes stood behind her shoulder, and then did not. She pressed her palm to the glass. It was cool and kept its job. The world continued to be itself with terrible competence. When people asked her, on dates and new friendships, in a doctor's office, filling out forms, if she had children, she learned how to answer in different languages. Not anymore. It's complicated. No. The words all meant yes, and the yes meant something the questions did not have space for. She did not keep photographs. She kept the habit of setting 2 plates and then putting one back. She kept the plant alive. On a morning like any other, she woke before dawn, not because of a sound, but because she was needed. The pendant lay on the dresser, reflecting a pale line that wasn't the window. She picked it up and felt, for the first time, nothing at all. No warmth, no hum. Only weight. She smiled, a real smile, the kind that embarrasses your face with its honesty. "Be good," she said aloud to the empty room, and laughter answered her from the stairwell. The old, careful laugh, the one that had arrived as if from elsewhere, and she let it be an echo or a memory or a visit without deciding which, because decision is a door, and some doors are courtesies. She put the pendant in a bowl by the sink with the spare keys. It caught the sunrise and made a small fire that did not burn. In the street, the bus sighed. The neighbors watered their geraniums. Somewhere, below the city, the long corridor waited behind a door etched with lines that looked like a map. Somewhere, a tall young man stepped through a crowd with his mother's eyes. And the world, which never stops watching back, turned to watch him too. Story 3. The Perfect Husband. When Lily met Daniel, he felt like a well-timed rescue. He had that clean, practiced kindness of a man who knew where to place his hand on a chair, how long to hold a door, when to lower his voice. At the waterfront gallery opening, he stood before a seascape with iron skies and said, "Funny how a storm can look so calm once it's painted." He didn't look at her when he said it, and somehow that made it feel less like a line. "Or maybe the painter is lying," Lily said. He turned, smiled. "Then it's a pleasant lie." He asked if she wanted coffee. He remembered she took it black, with sugar. 2 packets, because he noticed her hands, and her hands hesitated over the second one. It felt like being seen, without being devoured. By the 3rd date, he had favorite stories about her. The year she shaved her head for charity and kept it when she realized she liked the mirror. The time she cried at the shelter because a senior dog chose another family. He retold them back to her, polished, compact, ending on the laugh lines, as if they were already a history they shared. He said he did private consulting for high net worth clients. "It's estate stuff," he said, apologetic. "Trusts, taxes, it would bore you." "I'm a book designer," she said. "I live for boring." He laughed and didn't ask more, which felt refreshing at the time. Later, she would count the questions he never asked and understand they were silencers, not courtesies. They moved fast because he moved fast. Weekend trips. A ring in a velvet box resting on the table of a dim restaurant where the waiters were almost invisible. He never pressed. He enveloped. "I just know," he said. "Don't you?" She did. That was the problem and the answer. After a string of men who were warfare dressed as wit, Daniel's steadiness felt like safety. They married 11 months to the day after the gallery. He carried her over the threshold of a pale blue Victorian he had always wanted, and the wood groaned under his feet like an old house, welcoming a secret back home. The house was charming in the way that demanded constant forgiveness. Doors that swelled in rain, windows that stuck, floorboards that remembered every step. Daniel insisted on the blue room for the bedroom. "Light suits you." And Lily let him win, because the room did suit her, morning pooling like warm milk on the walls. She wanted to keep her apartment for a month, just in case the commute was hell. Just in case. Just in case. "We should start as we mean to go on," he said gently. "All in." He took the key from her palm and kissed her knuckles, and she told herself trust was supposed to feel like letting go of the railing. The first wrong thing was small enough to live as a joke. He bought her a new phone. "Better signal in this neighborhood," he said. "The blue houses eat reception." He laughed at his own line. The phone worked perfectly. It also came preloaded with fine friends, already connected to his number. "You're tracking me?" she asked, making it light. He smiled, disarming. "I'm finding you." There's a difference. The second wrong thing was the bracelet. He fastened it around her wrist while they watched a documentary he'd chosen about a couple who built a cabin together and never left it. "A token," he said, "for choosing me." When she took it off to shower, she noticed the tiny black dot beneath one of the stones. She held it under a lamp. A lens, not a flaw. She set it back on the dresser and told herself it was nothing. Smart jewelry, fitness tracking, everyone did it. The third wrong thing was 3:12 a.m. She woke to find him standing in the doorway, not looking at her, listening. "Daniel?" He smiled without moving. "Go back to sleep." In the morning, he was the same as always. Eggs and orange halved precisely. A kiss to the back of her neck that found the exact place it would be felt most. The house had rules that arrived wrapped as love. He wanted her home by 6. "Because I worry." He asked her to text when she reached the office, "so I can breathe." He urged her to quit. "You don't need that stress. You can design here. I built you a desk." And when she protested, he let it go, proud of himself for letting it go, and brought it up 2 days later as if it were her idea. At dinner, he corrected her softly, always with a smile. "That was last spring, not fall. You always forget that detail, darling." His friends, quiet, well-tailored, laughed and lifted their glasses. When she told a story he'd told first, he placed his hand on her knee under the table and squeezed until the story shrank. When she asked to visit her sister 2 towns over, he said, "Highways make me anxious. Let me drive you." And when she said she wanted to go alone, he smiled, then looked at her in a way that made the kitchen smaller. "You'll call me when you arrive." She did. She called before she could decide not to. He answered on the first ring and said, "Thank you." And she felt like a good person. The basement was unsafe. The stairs were old. The latch was rusty. He kept his work files down there, he said. He needed privacy for clients. He installed a lock, just in case a delivery guy gets curious. Her ring fell and rolled under the basement door on a Tuesday while she was arranging flowers. She jimmied the door with a butter knife. The old lock gave with a click she felt in her teeth. She told herself she was stealing only her own ring. The smell hit first, bleach, and beneath it something metallic and clean. A large room paneled in plastic sheeting like a greenhouse made of rain. Metal shelves lined with boxes, and black binders labeled with tidy archivist precision, A to M, N to Z, MISC. She should have turned around. She knew that as surely as she knew where her spine ended. Instead, she slid a binder down and opened the first plastic sleeve. Photos. A brunette in a white dress standing in front of a city hall. Daniel beside her, leaner maybe, but the same smile. A honeymoon shot. A lake so blue it looked fake, 2 shadows forming one on the sand. A newspaper clipping. Tragic accident claims local teacher. 29. Community beloved. Married to financial consultant Daniel Hart. She opened the next sleeve. A different woman, a different lake. By the time she reached the third binder, her hands had stopped shaking through effort, not success. A brunette with bangs, in front of a house that was not the blue house, but could have been its rehearsal. A clipping. Wife of missing consultant, presumed dead. The man in the photo's name wasn't Daniel, but it was his face. He had been practicing Daniel for a long time. She heard his car. She slid the binder away and wiped the plastic with the heel of her palm, as if fingerprints mattered. She stood at the sink, running water. She didn't drink, listening to the front door open, the coat hang, the keys in the bowl. He kissed her cheek. Surprise. Lunch. Are those dahlias? She said. Her voice sounded like a voice in a movie dubbed by a bad actor. He studied her. His eyes were the same eyes he used at dinner. His mouth smiled. His hand found her face and rested there. You've been crying. Allergies. You're lying. He said it as if it disappointed him that she'd choose a clumsy lie. I dropped my ring and... She swallowed. Found it. The pause that came next had teeth. Then he drew a breath and, almost tender, said, I told you the steps were dangerous. He cooked steak. He poured wine. He made a joke about the stock market and the dog-walking economy. We think people don't show us who they are, he said, sawing the meat exactly. But they do. We just don't like the story. He lifted his glass. To liking the story. She lifted her empty glass and hated herself for the flare of relief when he moved on. The neighbor, Sarah, had brought cookies the first week. If you ever need anything, she'd said, and Lily had believed her because her voice contained a history of doors opened for stray cats and lost kids. When Lily ran across the yard after dinner, barefoot, papers stuffed into her sweatshirt, Sarah's windows were boarded, and a for sale sign leaned like a dead thing against the fence. When she turned back, Daniel was on their porch. He didn't wave. He didn't need to. In bed that night, he held her like a man who loved his wife. You made me worry, he said into her hair. A murmur, a vow. I don't like worrying. I know, she said. It was both apology and intelligence report. He bought her flowers in the morning. Not lilies, too obvious. Not roses, too expected. Peonies, full to the point of collapse. He put the vase in the center of the table and said, Let's reset. Okay, she said, because you don't say, there are women in binders in our basement and you have their smiles. He skimmed a finger across her bracelet. Keep this on, he said softly. For me. She stopped sleeping. When she did, she dreamed of the basement plastic rustling like a raincoat walking itself. She dreamed of the women smiling because cameras taught them to. She dreamed of a lake that kept the color of secrets. She began to hide small things with the devotion of a squirrel who has read a winter forecast. Cash rolled into a lipstick tube. The old flip phone in the pocket of a coat she pretended to donate and instead rehung. A kitchen paring knife taped beneath the drawer and another slipped inside a boot she kept by the door. It brought a new problem. She lived in a tight circle of the kitchen and hall, moving items by inches, never letting her face betray that her feet had plans. A letter arrived, addressed to Mrs. Evelyn Hart. The postmark was a faint ghost. The envelope's glue had yellowed. She opened it by the kettle, silent. Final notice from a life insurance company. Beneficiary, Daniel Hart. Date of presumed death, 8 years prior. Her hands shook so badly, she set the kettle back wrong and scalded her knuckles. She hid the letter in the oven, cold, unused, and laughed at herself, because ovens are for fire and she had just put paper inside it. She returned to the basement the next morning, waited until his car rounded the corner and the house released its breath. She went faster this time, flipping pages like a person looking for a fact to undo the world. There must be a trick. There must be a man who looks exactly like another man. There must be an error in the reporting of tragedies. A fourth binder sat behind the first row, slimmer, tidier, current. Inside, her. Photos from the gallery, her shaved headgear, Her first morning in the Blue Room. Asleep. As if that were a skill. A photocopy of her driver's license. A passport application she hadn't filled out. A blank death certificate. She heard the front door open. He was early. She grabbed the folder and ran. Down the hall, up the steps that had never felt longer, toward the light of the back door. He met her at the threshold, catching her wrist with measured efficiency. "Lily," he said softly, breath even, "why do you keep running from me?" "What did you do to them?" Her voice sounded small because the question was large. His smile was practiced into truth. "I love them," he said, "the way I love you." On the street, tires swished through puddles. Headlights swept the fence as a car turned into the empty driveway next door. The realtor checking the property. Daniel's fingers loosened the way a knot admits it is a knot. Lily twisted, wrenched free, ran screaming for help, papers scattering behind her like birds startled into flight. When she looked back, he was gone. A porch light clicked off, as if a hand had happened to be near a switch. The blue house blinked and remembered how to be a house. The police walked the rooms. They were courteous, thorough, embarrassed by the domesticity of crime. The basement was immaculate. No binders, no boxes, plastic gone, shelves wiped. The bleach smell could have been spring cleaning. The bracelet lay under the radiator, its stone cracked, its little black eye pointed at the wall. They asked for Daniel's full name. She gave it. They asked for his social security number. She didn't know it. His family? Gone, he'd said. Work address, clients' homes, he'd said. The detectives' faces arranged themselves into the geometry of maybe you misunderstood. They were not unkind. They were operating with the tools their days allowed. One detective, older, leaned on the kitchen counter and looked at Lily as if at a painting he could not decipher. "You're safe now," he said, and flinched at his own sentence, hearing its emptiness. He gave her his card anyway and wrote his cell on the back. "Call if anything changes." Everything had already changed. That was the point. She moved apartments across town, then cities, then states. She changed her hair because hair is an announcement and hers had been telling the wrong story. She went back to work. Covers and spines and type on paper. Books that other people would hold. Things that pretended to permanence. She sat on trains and watched reflections glide across windows and learned again how to be nobody at noon. On a Tuesday, 3 months after she left, a florist rang her buzzer and left a bouquet on the stoop. White lilies. Too on the nose to be a coincidence. Too exact to be anything else. No return address, a card in neat, familiar handwriting. The truth always comes out. She held the card for a long time. She ripped it into small squares and sat very still until her breathing resembled a person's. There are ways to behave after a bad thing. Therapists know them. Self-help books list them. Friends offer them like recipes. Lily tried them all. She documented the facts she could trust. A receipt from the locksmith. A bank statement. The detective's card. She said the detective's name aloud sometimes to prove she existed. She took photos of the plant she didn't kill and texted them to her sister like postcards from an almost country. In grocery stores, she skirted men with certain coats. On sidewalks, she stepped aside for certain shoes. In cafes, she took the seat that faced the door, and when someone opened it, she watched the hinge instead of the person. Once, waiting to cross at a light, she saw him reflected in the storefront window. Not him, probably not him. Men own white shirts and haircuts, but the posture was exact, the chin a fraction too level, the stillness arranged to look casual. She didn't turn. She watched the reflection watch her, and then watched it walk away, not breaking into a run, not glancing back, just moving on, the way a tide withdraws and calls that action nothing more than time. Her sister said, "You should come stay with us." Her sister's husband said, "Get a gun." Her mother said only, "Sweetheart," because there are words that would shatter under their own weight. Lily bought a can of pepper spray and learned where the key should go between fingers. She practiced calling 911, without telling the operator her whole life story first. On the anniversary of the gallery opening, she went to the museum alone, as if exposure therapy could be art. A new show had replaced the storm seascapes. Still lifes of silver bowls and glass fruit so perfect the light looked trapped. She stood before a painting of a pear that had been rendered to the threshold of cruelty. A man beside her said, "It's almost too real to be true." His voice was wrong, not Daniel's, not close, but her heart hammered anyway. "It's all trick," she said, and left. A year after the basement, the older detective called from a number she didn't recognize. "Miss Hale?" "It's Hargrove." The name steadied her like a handrail. "Yes." "We've got a missing woman in Tolland. Husband says she ran off. The husband's name is Sean Castle. He's 39. He looks familiar." "Familiar how?" "The kind of familiar a nightmare has." She went to the station, even though he didn't ask. The photo on the screen was Daniel's face in different angles. Head shaved, hair longer, different frames on the same windows. The wife in this photo had a dimple that hadn't learned not to show up for cameras. "We found a storage unit," Hargrove said, tired. "Clean as a chapel. Box of tax forms, one contract for a consulting firm that doesn't exist, a stack of wedding magazines with addresses torn out." He looked at Lily and didn't say he was sorry. It would have been an insult to apology. "What do you need?" she asked. He spread his hands. "A mistake." Which meant he didn't make mistakes. He made decisions. They did not find Sean Castle. They found rental cars abandoned in 3 towns, each wiped to shining. They found a lake house rented by a man named Mark Whitfield with a workbench under the window that had never held a work. They found surveillance cameras and bracelets and buttons and a music box with a red velvet lining that recorded sound for 12 hours without a light to betray it. At home, Lily sat at her desk and wrote a list of ways to leave a house without opening a door. It was not practical. It was an exorcism. She taped the list inside a drawer and slept for 4 hours and woke convinced someone had been in the bedroom and opened the drawer and laughed. She moved again. The last time she saw him, she wasn't sure she had. Spring. A market. Small bright peppers and jewel-like tomatoes. A man in line for coffee 2 stalls over. Even from the side, he was precision. Still shoulders, hands at rest. Gaze placed. He wore a cap low. His jaw was clean-shaven, the way a blade makes decisions. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. She picked up a jar of honey she didn't want. She paid a woman with a sunflower tattoo. She walked to the bus stop and stood as if waiting. When the bus came, she didn't get on. When the bus left, she crossed the street and walked in the other direction, passing the stall where he had been. He wasn't there. The air was ordinary. At her door, a small box waited. White lilies. A card, neat, inevitable. The truth always comes out. She took the flowers to the alley and dropped them in the green bin and set a match to them, and watched them become smoke that smelled like a church learned to lie. A neighbor leaned out a window to ask if everything was all right. Lily lifted a hand. "Spring cleaning," she said. In the kitchen, she placed the card on the counter and laid her palm flat on it until her hand warmed the paper. She wrote on the back with a pen that had nearly run dry. "So does he." She put it in an envelope and addressed it to Daniel Hart, CEO, whatever name you like. She licked the flap and did not mail it. She tucked it in the freezer behind the peas, because some things deserve cold. Time is not a healer, It is a contractor. It replaces what it can and hides what it can under drywall. Lily learned the routes through her city that felt like escape lines rather than loops. She learned the precise kindnesses friends can bear and which stories could be kept alive without oxygen. She learned that she could be afraid and brave in the same hour without canceling. On a late summer evening, she walked past a gallery, not the one where she had met him, but white walls and wine, and a painting of a sea so still it had to be lying. Inside, a couple stood shoulder to shoulder, their heads angled toward the same storm. The man said something that made the woman laugh and touch his sleeve. The man's profile was not Daniel's at all. Lily went home and left the porch light on for herself. Inside, she opened a drawer and looked at the knife taped under it and left it there. Not because she didn't need it, but because she had learned to live with tools in their right places. She slept. She woke at 3:12, the old hour, and listened. The house held her without talking. Somewhere, in some other blue house, in some other state, a door would open for a woman who needed air. Somewhere, a man who had practiced love like a profession would smile his practiced smile. Somewhere, a detective would look at a photo and feel the indecency of déjà vu. She got out of bed and made tea and stood at the window with the cup warming her hands. Her reflection looked back like a person who could keep a plant alive. On the sill, a single petal had fallen from a bouquet she had bought for herself, not Lily's. The petal's red bled at the edges like paint in water. She lifted the petal and dropped it in the sink, watched it spin to the drain. She said quietly to the empty kitchen, "The truth always comes out." And this time it sounded less like a threat, and more like a promise she had made to herself. And in the street outside, a bus sighed, stopped, opened its doors, and let people step down into the night they had chosen.